In this video, we're going to be replacing the rear brakes on this 2015 Hyundai Sonata. To remove the rear wheel, it's going to be a 21 millimeter. Take the lug nuts off now. So now on the back of our caliper, we're going to take out our two 14 millimeter bolts, one on the top, one on the bottom. Because of the location of the brake hose here, we're going to use a shallow socket. Just be careful of that brake line. A wrench is also an option here. So we're going to leave this bolt in just a little bit while we loosen and take out the top. So your two bolts. So now we have our two caliper bolts out. What we're going to do is pull our caliper off of our brake pads. Sometimes you can work it back and forth like this, right up and off. Sometimes you need to get into the bottom with the small pry bar and work that caliper off. Now that our caliper is free, we're going to move the caliper out of the way without putting any undue stress on this line, which could potentially mean putting it on a hanger here, up out of the way, or taking the caliper and sitting it up front in front of your shock on the suspension here. That's what we're going to do, so we'll remove our hanger. Now with our caliper out of the way, we can remove our brake pads. Sometimes you can get in here with the thumb and push them out of the way and push them off the rotor. Sometimes you can use a flathead or a small pry bar. Just give them a push out of the way. We'll do the same on the front. All right, so we never really recommend prying in from the pad side unless you are replacing your brake pads. So what's happened here, these have rusted and corroded right to the hardware. So that was our only option to pry these guys out. Now our caliper bracket is held in by two bolts, top and bottom. Those are going to be 14 millimeter. Take those out now. And the top one, if you can get your socket in there, go ahead. If not, you might need a shallow socket. So we switched over to a shallow socket here because the more this bolt comes out, the more it was locking our ratchet against the shock. So just keep that in mind. At this point, remember to catch your washer at the same time you pull out your bolt. Don't lose that washer. Now we can remove our caliper bracket. Set that aside. Now at this point, we're down to our rotor. You can see the wheel spins pretty easy. The reason we mention that is now we have 2 Phillips screws to remove. Typically these screws are stuck in there really well. Ours are actually somewhat loose, but what would happen is at this point you try to undo these and the wheel's going to spin. So what you can do here is one of 2 things. You can either go in the vehicle and apply the e-brake. That should lock up your hub and your wheel. Or in our case, we're on a lift. We don't have access to the e-brake. We're just going to put a pry bar to the bottom of the vehicle. Rotate the hub until it locks and take out our screws. Now again, like I said, ours are loose already, but this is what you would do if you were fighting these to take them out. Now that you have your 2 Phillips screws out, your rotor should come forward. If you've had to apply your e-brake to stop this from spinning, you'll want to go in the vehicle now and release your e-brake, because what that's doing is putting outward pressure on the inside of this surface here, so you will not be able to easily remove your rotor. Now, your rotor should come straight off. Sometimes it needs a little help to loosen it up, to slide forward. Okay, in this case, it's not loose at all. So what we're going to do is come in behind here where our caliper sat and our brake pads, hit it with a mallet, and keep rotating it, doing the same thing until it comes free. If you're going to spin it, just watch your fingers here. You can get them caught pretty easily. There we go. Okay, so at this point, we're going to want to clean up this surface. This one's actually very clean. There's no rust or corrosion, so we won't be sanding this. If we needed to, we can come in with a wire brush and clean up this surface here. If you had any rust or corrosion, for us, we're going to get rid of any grime or grease with some brake clean. And we're just going to come back in here and give this a little dry off. So now what we're going to do is apply some anti-seize to the hub surface, but ours is an aerosol and we don't need to anti-seize parking brake pads. So we're going to cover up a side at a time. So before we install our new rotor, we're going to put it on backwards. And we're going to clean the surface that our pads are going to go to. Typically in shipping, they'll put greases or oils on this surface. We're going to clean it. We're also going to clean the inside where our shoes, our emergency brake shoes, are going to go. Just going to use some brake parts cleaner. Once we do the back side, we'll flip it around and do the front. Now because we're done with the back and we're ready to do the front, we're actually going to take this off and align these 2 screw holes in the proper position. Because now when we slide it on, it's going to stay on. Now at this point, to hold our rotor into position, we're going to put our 2 Phillips screws back in. Again, at this point, to tighten these down if you need to, you can put a breaker bar here to stop the rotor from spinning. We're just going to hold that rotor, tighten these up. Looks good. Now we have our adjustment wheel access hole here. Our adjustment wheel is at the top. So what we're going to do now is get a small flathead screwdriver and adjust that wheel, open or closed, until we hear a little bit of drag on our parking brake shoes. Once we hear that drag, we're going to back it off just a touch, and then we'll put our rubber cover from our old rotor in here. So now we have the rotor lined up with the parking brake adjustment wheel. So now what we're going to do is move that adjustment wheel either tighter or looser, depending on what we need. All right, so all we're doing now is adjusting this just past the point where we hear any friction. All right, so if you spin this, you can hear it lock up. We're getting just to the point where it doesn't lock up. All right, so now that we have our parking brake shoes adjusted, I'm going to go ahead and reinstall our cap. Now this rubber plug here, or cap, came from the old rotor. Just reinstall it into the new one. If you happen to put this in and it falls inside the rotor, take the time to remove it. You don't want that to get stuck in your parking brakes. All right, so once our cap's in and our parking brakes are adjusted, now we can start to add on our brakes. All right, so now we're going to clean up our caliper bracket. Our new brake pads are going to come with caliper boots, caliper pin bushing, and new brake hardware. So what we're going to do is clean up this caliper bracket and make room for all of the new parts. First thing we're going to do is remove our old hardware off the bracket. Okay, now we're going to take out our pins. I'm just going to pull these straight out. If the boot comes with it, great. If not, that's okay too. So you can see there's a difference in the pins. One has a rubber boot, one does not. We're going to keep them in order of the way they came out. Now from here, we're going to remove our rubber boots. And instead of cleaning these, we can just discard them. Now what we're going to do is where our new brake hardware is going to go, we're going to take a wire brush and clean up any loose corrosion or rust that's in here. Do the same thing on the other side. And what I like to do here is just give it a once over. Anywhere you see rust or corrosion built up around it, anything loose, just go ahead and give it a little brush. There's no harm in having a clean part. And again, where your mounting points are, these should be flush, so we're just going to give these a quick little rub, make sure that they do go back on flush. Now from here, We're going to clean inside where our pins are. There's going to be some old grease and grime in there. We're going to remove that with some brake clean. So now what we're going to do is use some brake clean in here. This is blocked off at the back, so if you go full pressure with this, it's going to shoot back at you, so just be careful. Watch your eyes. All right, so you can see some old grease coming out. And what we're going to do now is put that aside, let that drain, drip dry. We're going to clean our caliper pins. So on this pin we have a new rubber, it comes with our brake pads. So what we'll do is using a small pick, we will take that rubber right off. Clean that out. And now install our new rubber. Now what you want to do with these pins is make sure all the way up to this lip is clean and free of any corrosion. Your caliper boots are going to make a seal up at the top there, and that's where it's going to stop any moisture from getting in. So to help with that moisture protection, we're going to put a little bit of grease on these caliper pins. Not a lot, just a light coat all the way up to that lip. All right, we can set these aside once they're greased. And now what we're going to do is put our rubber boot, our new boots that came with our brake pads, into our caliper bracket. These are just going to be press fit right in. All right, and now we can install our pins. Now you'll notice on our caliper pins, one of them had the rubber, one of them didn't. Make sure they go back into the same location they came out of. When you install, just push straight in. And what we're going to do is just push them both straight in. And then we're going to push them all the way down. And that'll help seat that rubber all the way on the pin. From here, we're just going to go through a little cycle of all the way in, all the way out. So what we're going to do is just give them a little push up and down, make sure they cycle freely. And we do. So now, flip it up on its side, take a little bit more grease where the hardware for your brake pad is going to go. This is going to help prevent moisture and corrosion and a little bit of vibration. And now we can install our hardware. These are just going to get pressed into position. All right, now that one's in. You can move on to the top. Or the other side, rather. All right, now we're ready to take this to the vehicle. Now we can bring our caliper bracket to the vehicle and start to install our two bolts. So we're just going to thread these in by hand to start. now that we have these snugged up, we'll come back and torque them down. So now we're going to come back and torque our caliper bolts down to 70 foot-pounds. And now we can install our pads. All right, now we're going to get the back in. So now, before we replace our caliper onto our new pads, our piston is too far out. Our new pads have a little bit more material here, so they're going to take up more room. So we need to compress this piston backwards to fit it over our new pads. We have a compression tool here. Again, while you're doing this, just make sure to watch your brake hose. Okay, now we have our piston compressed. Back our tool out. And put our caliper onto the brake pads and our caliper bracket. And then we can start by hand our two bolts. At some point here, because we have new fresh grease and new boots in here, these pins that we had greased up may start to spin as we start to tighten these down. We'll deal with that when we get there. Just something to take note of. So now we're going to tighten up our caliper bolts. We're going to torque these down to 20 foot-pounds. And if in doing this, this back bolt here on our pins starts to rotate, we'll need to come in and back that up while we torque it, but it looks pretty good. Do the same thing on the top. So now down at the rear caliper, we're going to take our cover off of the bleeder screw. It's going to be a 10 millimeter. So we're going to back that bleeder screw off until we see a consistent stream of fluid. We're looking for no air bubbles, no breaks in the fluid, no hesitations in the line. As soon as we get that, we're going to close that bleeder screw. I don't see any air bubbles. Just open it up a little bit more. All right, we can close that line up now. Now, what I like to do is come in here with some brake clean, hose down that area, dry that off, get rid of any drips or any fluid that may have been there. And that way, when this is dry, you'll be able to see if you have any leaks that you have to address after the fact. Before we finish, put our cap back on. Now we can move on to wrapping it up. Okay, so now we can install our wheel. Okay, so while the vehicle's in the air, we're just going to snug up these lug nuts. and then we'll drop it down and torque them. We're going to even do this in a crisscross pattern because we want this wheel to go on flat. So now that we're on the ground, the tire can't spin, we're going to torque down our lug nuts to 75 foot-pounds. We're going to do that in a crisscross pattern.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.